The first week of car launches for 2024 is over, and we've seen plenty of carbon, some colour and interesting technical changes. Here's your overview of the 2024 cars so far. While their launch provided insight into their driver programme and their sponsors, Williams didn't give us much to work with technically speaking, as the real FW46 reportedly wasn't completed in time to show off at the launch. Instead, the team unveiled their livery on a show car, which features a heritage navy and dark blue design, red and white pinstripes and the now iconic Duracell airbox. Bahrain testing is just a couple of weeks away, and this will be our first glimpse of the first car created under James Vowles' leadership. While Williams launched just their livery, our first look at a real 2024 car came at the Stake F1 team launch. Beyond a look at the striking fluorescent green and mostly carbon fibre livery, we got a tour of their C44 Challenger from the team's new technical director James Key, who had previously worked at McLaren. James described the car as being aggressively redesigned in terms of its aerodynamic package, and as such is virtually a completely new car, with just some similarities to the C43 at the rear. So what changes have they made? One of the biggest visible changes the team has made is a switch to a pull rod configuration of their front suspension, something we seem to be increasingly seeing teams do, which we'll come on to later. Push or pull rod suspension refers to the rod that connects the top of the wheel to the torsion spring, as it can be configured to either pull or push the spring. Which layout a team chooses is ultimately up to them, but there are pros and cons to each. A pull rod layout, as seen on the C44, has an aerodynamic advantage for teams. Because the rod is nearly horizontal, it's less disruptive on the airflow around the front of the car. The suspension components can also be mounted lower on the car, lowering its centre of gravity, but making them harder to access. A push rod layout, however, is more steeply inclined, as seen on the AMR 23, meaning it has a greater effect on airflow, but the suspension components are more easily accessible as they're mounted higher up. By switching to a pull rod on their C44, Stake have committed to the option that's more aerodynamically advantageous, but this of course has an impact on the aero for the rest of the front of the car. James Key described this as a bit risky, but the fundamental aerodynamic improvement that a pull rod layout brings is something the team couldn't ignore in their aggressive redesign. At the rear, the team is stuck with a push rod layout as they had last season, following the pattern led by McLaren and Red Bull. Stake have, as we might expect from many teams up and down the grid this year, taken some inspiration from the RB19, the dominant and championship-winning car from 2023. Like the RB19, Stake's C44 features an extended lower edge of the sidepod inlet, but the sidepod itself is more of a waterslide design like we've seen on the Aston Martin AMR 23, but Stake's appears to be more shallow and less dramatic, a bit more similar to the 2023 Mercedes. There's more of a ridge shoulder on the outside and a slide effect down the centre of the sidepods, which should help to improve the flow of air around them. The team have also redesigned their roll hoop and moved to use an A-frame structure that we've seen up and down the grid previously. This is an important area for the safety of the car, and Sauber's previous single spike design failed in Zhou Guanyu's huge crash at the British Grand Prix in 2022, but this should be an improvement in that area too. As perhaps would be expected, the car they launched with is not going to be the car that they first run on track, as James Key said at the launch that they'd already made changes beyond this first specification. But the car is definitely an impressive redesign, if not a totally new design compared to their previous Challenger, and it'll be interesting to see it head out on track. Alpine, like Stake, have undertaken a complete redesign of their car for 2024, in what their technical director Matt Harmon is calling a bold new approach to their development. The team's struggle for performance in 2023 has made them look inwards to find a solution for 2024, and as such they have a brand new car from back to front, so much so that only the steering wheel is the same. So what changes have they made? The biggest change they've made might be on their rear suspension system. While it's still in a pushrod layout like last year's car, the changes they've made to the kinematics will hopefully address their issues with balance through corners, which was a big struggle for the drivers in 2023. But these changes could mean that the team has suffered a hit to their aerodynamics around the rear suspension, meaning, according to their technical director, that they may not get maximum performance initially, but they are hopeful that with some development and upgrades, they can extract this over the year. They've also made changes to optimise the cooling under the bodywork of the car, meaning they've been able to close many of the cooling vents of their 2023 car, therefore reducing drag and improving speed. Something very important for the team, as it's likely that their Renault power unit will still have a horsepower deficit to others on the grid. Alpine are cautious going into this season, saying they've not anywhere near achieved the potential of this car yet, something they hope will help prevent a plateau in development like they had in 2023. But will this plan and aggressive approach help them finish higher than 6th in the Constructors this year? The final launch of the week was of the VCarbo 1, the first car of the newly rebranded Visa Cash App RB team. VCarb made no secret about the fact that they'd be taking as many parts as possible under the regulations from their sister team Red Bull to help improve the team's competitiveness, and their technical specification shows they've definitely done this. Firstly, their front suspension is now in the same pull rod layout as Red Bull's. This is an area they've taken parts for from Red Bull technology, but it's not just the external pull rod or wishbones. The spec says they've taken internal front suspension parts too, like the dampers and rockers. Their rear suspension suspension is also from Red Bull, but this was also the case on last season's AlphaTauri. While we're just working with renders until the V-Carb 01 heads out on track for a shakedown, we can see some visual similarities to previous Red Bull cars too. The side pod inlets are far more open than the letterbox style we saw on the RB19 after some upgrades last season, and are perhaps more similar to those on the RB19's early season spec. They also share the extension of the lower part of the inlet, and the inlet is sitting higher up than we can see on the AT04's renders, helping open up the undercut of the side pod. The side pod itself is very similar to the AT04's, and it's possible, if not highly likely, that the team has reused parts of last year's car when creating these renders, so we could of course see plenty of changes by testing and the first race. The first half of the launches have all been for teams who finished in the lower half of the standings last season, so just as this could be to blame for the carbon fibre liveries as a result of weight issues, it could also be the reason behind the aggressive approaches and the Red Bull-like designs we've seen so far. Whether or not the top teams will follow suit in their development and their liveries remains to be seen this week, but what do you think of the cars we've seen so far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments and share this video with someone you think would enjoy it, and of course subscribe to Apex for more deep dives into the F1 world.